Hi everyone, and welcome to a brand new global event called Detach the Stigma, Mental Health Within the Workplace. And the reason both myself and my colleague Lyr decided to set up this, which has been sponsored by Breaking the Chalk, is because we feel that it's a very important conversation that needs to be had around how mental health is treated within the workplace, not only in the legal profession like mine, but in all professions and on a global scale. My name is Steve Lawlor. I'm a mental health lawyer in England with 10 years experience, and I have also set up the Legal Wolf podcast, which has gone global in terms of getting different perspectives all over the world in how mental health is perceived in their countries and what could be done to reduce the stigma and normalise the conversation. Also, you will probably notice from the shirt that I'm wearing that, yes, ladies and gents, it is coming home, the Euros, to England this Sunday.
I'm Lyr Weltsman. I am the co-host, and this event is sponsored by my company, Breaking the Chalk, which is education and mental health for youth. So breaking the way we provide education and support our youth's mental health. I'm an educator and child counsellor and mental health advocate and blogger, sharing my experience with mental health. And really, obviously the reason why co-hosting with Steve is to break the stigma of mental health in general and to start the conversation about it, and just breaking the taboos. And the only way we can start getting for people to get the help they need is by having these conversations and sharing personal experiences. So yeah, that's me.
Marie, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Marie and I am chiming in from Douala, Cameroon. Okay, yeah, so I'm chiming in from Douala, Cameroon. I am a lawyer like Steve, right? But I'm also a psychotherapist and I'm an author, I'm a mom, I'm so many things in one. I'm all over the place, and I'm also a person with a lived experience of mental health. And I actually have an experience while I was working for a telecommunications company. I'll be glad to share that today. And I have noticed there's a shift with the way mental health is perceived in the workplace now. I don't know if I want to say thanks to COVID. So we are going to look at that. And so I'm excited, to keep talking about mental health, to normalize the conversations, to let people know, well, having a mental health challenge is not the end of it, right? We can be as high functioning as every other person. So there's no need to stigmatize anyone, especially in the workplace. That's where we spend a lot of time each day. So it's really not called for to not show, not have empathy for our colleagues or to talk in hush-hush when mental health is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Karen?
Hello, I'm Karen Dahl. I'm located in Minneapolis, Minnesota in the US. I'm a psychologist and have always worked in corporate. So I work with a lot of professionals and organizations on this topic, helping individuals work on mental health, and also equally passionate about mental health awareness, especially in the workplace. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Rachida?
Hi everyone, I'm Rachida and I'm located in Algeria. I spent more than 10 years in the corporate world, and I'm fully recovered from my eating disorders and founder of the Mind Safe podcast as well. I'm a non-profit mental health activist. I'm excited to join you and to speak about the mental health within the workplace.
Thank you. And Claudia?
Thank you. Hi. Yes. So my name is Claudia Sartor, and I am Deputy CEO of the Global Mental Health Peer Network. I started my career off as a lawyer as well. Currently not practicing, but I am a wellness counselor and global mental health advocacy leader. And part of what the Peer Network does is really bring to the table experiences and perspectives of people living with mental health conditions, about issues that really do affect them. And workplace mental health is something that comes up quite a bit. So really excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Kristel?
Morning, everybody. I'm Kristel. I'm calling in from Fiji. Like a lot of people on this, I'm a legal practitioner, and my main objective, or how I got started in all of this, was as a peer-to-peer educator back in university. Um, since then, I've always had an interest in mental health advocacy, especially since there's a huge stigma, like everyone else experiences, I suppose, here in Fiji. So just trying to normalize this, as much as within the workplace, but in general, just so it's treated like any other medical issue, really, and people access the help that they need. Thank you.
Thank you. Shawnna?
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here. Thank you once again for inviting me. And so I'm Shawnna Hunter. I'm an educator. I am from Jamaica, but I'm currently in Ontario, Canada. And how I came about, becoming a mental health advocate is through my international education experience and seeing the lack of support as it relates to international teachers and how best we can meet their needs, and to also find policies and techniques that can help international teachers. I am so happy I'm able to be here today, and I'm looking forward to what we can gain from this discussion and how best we can continue to advocate in this regard as it relates to mental health. So it's nice to be here.
Thank you. And last but by no means least, Dynes.
Hi everyone, I'm Dynes. I'm from the Philippines. I'm also a psychologist here in the Philippines, and currently I'm working in a university as a discipline formator. So most likely my mental health advocacies is started with my practice as a clinical psychologist with abused children, and then with different age population. And right now I'm also finishing my doctoral program in clinical psychology. So I'm looking forward to this session about mental health in the workplace.
Fantastic. So in order to kick off the conversation around mental health within the workplace, one of the topics that I would like to start with is discussing the blame game that happens within the workplace. So obviously this is quite common, not just with mental health, but with all forms of health, that there is a blame game within the workplace. But there tends to be a lot of stigma attached to people suffering with a mental health condition within the workplace in terms of the way they are treated. Who would like to kickstart this conversation in discussing the blame game within the workplace?
So thank you, Steve, for having us today and for creating this safe space for every one of us. And thank you for everything that you provide for your community and your clients. So I have more than 10 years, and maybe I'm not a psychologist or a therapist, but I have been diagnosed with eating disorders, and I had to battle for 3 years while having a career. So what I can say is that people are left without the minimum or the bare minimum, let alone that we are not encouraged. For me, I totally did not speak whatsoever about the eating disorders. I had to battle alone and also show up for my work. So yeah, that was 3 years where, full of tears, full of pain, but also full of, I would say that proud moments and beautiful moments. what happens is about the blame game is that when there is a lack of communication, and also because of the regulations, I don't know about the rest of the world, but in Algeria, the regulations and the laws are not helping employees to have the bare minimum of their rights. So, and the lack of communication makes it even worse, because what happens is that employers, they are blaming the government because they tell you, well, if you are having an invalid card, because if you have a chronic mental illness in Algeria, you will be labeled simply as invalid, which means that you will not have access for let's say a salary just like your peers, but you will have a pension which is far way less than a normal salary or any human being. So they are not basing the, let's say, how to say, their rights to have a fair salary. They are basing it on some outdated laws. And because of the lack of communication, the employer, they tell you, well, I'm sorry, I have to follow the regulations. I cannot offer you, if you declare to your employer that you have a mental illness and you have an invalid card that will allow you to get your treatment, your medical treatment, fully, by the insurance, fully covered. So there is a blame game between what is happening as people are kind of like, I'm not, let's say, fighting for their rights. And they're just, it is okay. I just need to hide it. Employers are okay because they cannot, go against the government. So what happens is because of the lack of communication and because of the outdated regulations, people are left with really the bad minimum, and let alone the stigma, the traditions, and all the other facts. So the blame game is going between employees because they are accepting, and I was one of them because I accepted to just completely deal with my own troubles, but show up every day for my work. And I did not do anything back then, but I'm trying to do the best that I can now with my nonprofit mental health advocacy. So we are here today to trying to at least change the regulations, because in my opinion, unless there will be changing the laws and regulations, we cannot speak about real change. Yes, the stigma is probably less right now, but it's just, I feel like it's just on social media. People are seeking therapy, but still, when it comes to the workplace, we haven't seen, let's say, real change because the regulations and the laws are still the same, and mental health needs, let's say, within the workplace, needs something that goes beyond the wellness programs and the very basic trainings that are being offered right now. So I hope that this contribution could be valuable and helpful, at least.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kristel, I'll come to you next because I know it's very early in the morning where you are.
Thank you. That was just so interesting to hear from Rachida, and heartbreaking in a way that that is the situation there. But just to add, from Fiji, we do have legislation in place that makes it illegal, basically, to discriminate against a person with mental health issues within the workplace. And unfortunately, despite, I mean, I believe that came into effect back in 2011. It's been roughly 10 years now. Uh, possibly because there hasn't been enough discussion around the subject, of course, because of stigma and people just not feeling comfortable coming forward discussing these things, and possibly as well not being aware that it's even a legal right that they have, because I'm not sure that it's quite referenced well enough in our employment legislation that there is a connection between the legislative framework. So it's probably a combination of the stigma and lack of awareness, but people don't talk about it. There is a similar feeling that if you do talk about it, that you're going to be stigmatized, of course, within the workplace, but also face some type of repercussion. I've known people within law firms who have spoken previously about going through depression or other mental health issues even here, there is such a lack of awareness about, eating disorders, for example. I mean, we still have people promoting CrossFit and CrossFit apps that actively encourage people, like you'll have a meat pukey option on the CrossFit app, and that's something that's celebrated. But I know from people who have shared their experiences that that's very triggering for someone with eating disorder, trying to overcome an eating disorder. So particularly the woman I knew was bulimic, so it was very difficult for her to keep seeing those things. And I mean, obviously, prioritizing her mental health, she opted out. But then working out was, really important for her to cope with her mental health issues and the stress of work. So it was a difficult situation, something that just compounded the difficulty of an already difficult situation, if that makes sense. And then just within the workplace itself, I mean, there's so many issues as well in terms of the blame game. I feel that employers they feel that if they do talk about mental health, that, all the blame's just going to be put on them, that they're putting too much uh, stress or too much, on their employees, and that they're just going to get 100% of the blame. And then, of course, there's all kinds of I don't know if excuses is quite the right word, because it is true that other aspects of our lives do factor into it. And, you can't necessarily put the blame entirely on work, but considering a huge chunk of our lives is spent within the workplace, and thanks to smartphones and other technology now, even outside of work, we're still put under so much stress and, pressure. I feel that it's almost negligent or just ignorant even to say that it doesn't play a significant part in our mental health struggles or just our mental health in general. So there does need to be, I think, just greater awareness, definitely more discussion. I think employers need to educate themselves, be aware of the impact of what the workplace environment has. If it's a toxic workplace environment, that they can take steps to address those issues. And it's not in terms of the blame game, it's not trying to blame someone so they lose out or whatever it is, or that it's going to be a liability, but it could actually improve productivity within the workplace, and it could end up being a huge plus for the organization overall, not just the employees but everybody, in terms of profitability as well. If people are able to get the help that they need as employees, then they're going to be more productive. They're going to want to stay on. So there's going to be a lower rate of turnover, presumably. So there's a whole lot of pros that really could come about as part of this. So yeah, just my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, and it's definitely valued, Kristel, in terms of everything that you've said. Marie, come to you next.
Okay, yeah. Hi, Steve. Thanks for, I want to share my lived experience, and I want to, from a point of a professional now, mental health professional, I also want to say that there has been some progress, but there's still a lot to be done. Okay, let's get back to 2008. Yeah, 2007. I was pregnant and I was working in a telecommunications company, and I had to be going all over the country to check the transmission sites and review the contracts and all of those things. And doing that kind of work while pregnant, you're not in the best of moods, right? And before people come to work, they have their past, they have their life, they have their childhood. And although people sometimes say, don't bring your home things to the office, or don't bring your office things to the house, it's impossible. You cannot separate the mind you take to the office from the mind you take home. So I am also somebody who grew up with child abuse. I have a history of trauma and everything. So anywhere I go, I am alert. I am sensitive to kind of stigma and, people not being just nice. So I got into this company. The culture was already, I felt like it's so toxic, all this competition, and the pressure, and I'm somebody who likes walking. So I would walk even on Saturdays and everything, and I'll be on the road sometimes for 1 month and in that condition. And the worst happened. I lost my daughter in February of 2008. I mean, she was born today, she died the next day. But all through my pregnancy, it was like, that's nothing in the office. There's no wellness program. You know, you have a sick bay, if you have a wound, you can go there. But if you are tired up there, there's nowhere you go to talk to anybody there. If you talk to your colleague, what is your colleague going to tell you, you know? So you just keep it in, you walk, you are sore, you go home, you're just trying to sleep. You cannot even be the person, you know, you can't be the best at home. And then the next day you start again, and then the traffic, and then all of those things. And then after that event, nobody said anything. Like, I have 3 colleagues, and I still thank those 3 colleagues up to today, my supervisor and 2 other colleagues who came to visit me at my home, because I couldn't just resume immediately, you know, but that was it. Nobody said nothing. HR didn't say nothing. In short, they even started to look at me like I had committed a crime. Was I even pregnant in the first place? You know, that eats you up. And so something that you would like to talk about, to get it off your chest, you can't talk about it, neither in the office nor at home. Because in my country, in my African context, we don't talk about the loss of a child who dies at 1 year or a miscarriage. You don't talk about those things. It's still taboo. So at home, you can't talk about it. In the office, you can't talk about it. Where else can you talk about it? So imagine internalizing all that trauma and the pain plus all what you have. How can you be productive again at the workplace? I actually resigned at the end of that year, you know, although they wanted to promote me, I couldn't stay there anymore. The environment became so toxic, and I carried that pain in me for several years. And 1 year, the theme for the World Mental Health Day was stigma at the workplace or something. And I shared that story, and I broke down crying, and it brought me so much relief. Now, back to today, before joining this call, I was with a client virtually. She's working in a banking institution, and she's had some problems and stuff. And it's her boss who recommended that she gets some sessions, you know. So they have even had meetings with her and tried to explain things to people and stuff. And I'm like, wow. It would appear it's company by company, the way they see it now. But I also think it's because everybody is kind of, a lot of people are on their alert, are more conscious about mental health now because of COVID, you know, the restrictions just made it, even going to work, everybody's nervous and everything. So as much as there is no specific regulation in my country, we don't even have a mental health policy in this country. So I can't even talk about one for the office, you know, but it is left to each company to kind of have, you know, an informal kind of way of making it okay to talk about mental health and to seek for help when you're not doing good. And then to kind of, you know, organize events so that the different colleagues, your colleagues, everybody knows that it's okay. I know I was not the only one who had any kind of challenge in that company, but nobody talks about it. But statistics, some work has been done today, even with the medical personnel, like 331 of them in a study I recently read, that they have moments of depression and anxiety and stuff like that. Hospitals are also workplaces. So I just want to say that from 1998 to 2021, there has been some progress, but much more has to be done. Thank you.
I would completely agree with that, Marie. I do think we have come quite a way compared to how we were 10, 20 years ago in the workplace. But there's still a lot more that needs to be done to make people who do suffer with a mental health condition feel included within the workplace. So they feel comfortable enough to talk about their experiences. And I don't think we are yet at that stage. Karen, what would you like to add?
Thank you. So first of all, Marie, thank you for sharing that. And it's heartbreaking to hear that you had a personal trauma and tragedy like that and didn't get the support from your work community. It's heartbreaking and disappointing. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And, it's helpful for me to hear the perspectives, and I'm eager to learn more from all of you that are in the legal profession about the implications there, because I'm not as aware of those issues. How I tend to get faced with mental health challenges with my clients, a lot of times is around burnout, and the prevalence of burnout in the United States, and I'm guessing everywhere, is astounding right now, and how it presents, of course, is people experiencing severe exhaustion and inefficacy, so not feeling effective in their roles, and skepticism, so they experience helplessness and hopelessness. And part of what I think is very damaging about this, it's a medical condition, it's significant and impairing. And people are afraid to speak up because they don't want to be found out. They don't want their managers to think that they can't handle it. They don't want to be discriminated against, and fill in the blank of all the other mental health, conditions and people that are trying to function and facing eating disorders and anxiety and depression. It's the same stigma. They're afraid of having that being used against them in some way. And part of what I think is really, it needs to change, is that burnout is really an infrastructure problem, and organizations are set up to optimize to take as much from people as they're willing to give. And that they're not going to run around and tell people to stop bringing so much value, or tell the salespeople to stop selling so much. And then I think it really creates a setup for people to overfunction and overcommit. And if we already are having mental health challenges, that can be disastrous in terms of overdoing it and having that come at a cost to mental health, wellness, well-being, and physical health. And because of that, unfortunately, the responsibility is on the employees and the managers and the leaders to be the ones to set those boundaries and to push back, which is a really scary experience when that's your livelihood and we only have one career. And so in terms of the blame game, I think that too much falls on employees to have to advocate and push back, when really sometimes the expectations are, we need you to be to produce more than what is humanly possible. So we face human limitations. We're expected to do that much more. And then there's shame around it, having to admit that somehow we can't function past human capacity. So that's what I tend to hear about a lot with clients. And there is more conversation, and it is becoming a bit more mainstream. And I'm hoping that post-COVID, we're on the cusp of mental health revolution in the workplace.
Yeah, I think COVID has been an accelerator for people to understand the importance of mental health, that it's just as important as physical health, that you can't have one without the other. As Gonzalo said in the chat, in his message, I mean, in terms of companies doing more, how can HR departments do more around the issue of mental health? How can other companies help? So companies who specialize in improving mental health with employees, how can those type of companies help big companies with huge HR departments to improve their awareness raising around mental health? Because in my experience, particularly in the legal profession, they're very exclusive of a lawyer's mental health. If you talk up about suffering with anxiety or depression, the reason lawyers don't and won't talk up is because they'll feel that they'll be perceived as weak, they'll be unable to do their job, and that they would lose the respect of their fellow peers, which is couldn't be further from where we need to get to. We need to get to the stage whereby people feel comfortable in talking about their mental health and eradicating the stigma. I know, quite interestingly, I saw a video on TikTok. Yep, it's not the best source of reference or for information, but I saw a video from a Dr. Jess Taylor.
The phrase and the campaign that you'll have seen over the last decade or so to end mental health stigma is an oxymoron. You can't end mental health stigma because the entire discipline is based on stigma. The mental health movement, psychiatry, psychology, it's based on stigmatizing individuals who don't conform, who are, struggling or something has happened to them. So we medicate them, we isolate them, we stigmatize them, we tell them there's something wrong with them, and then we tell them that we can solve it by giving them medication or treatments. You cannot end mental health stigma because the entire movement is about giving you stigma that you then are supposed to respond to.
Which I don't necessarily agree with that, because I feel the more you talk about it, the more people discuss their lived experiences, the more you normalise the conversation, and you will eventually reduce the stigma around it. So how can companies improve their awareness around mental health? What is the way forward in order for it to be more acceptable? Claudia?
Thanks, Steve. So I think on this particular topic, I want to just bring in a little bit of my own experience. So having been at a law firm, and then subsequently I worked for an international bank for 6 years, and the pressure that comes with working in the legal and the finance field is just really, it's hectic, and it comes with its pros, but it also comes with its cons. And after I was diagnosed and hospitalized and eventually came out about it at work, purely through having been hospitalized, because now I had to come back to work, but my leave was taken away because I basically used all of it. But they didn't take it as sick leave. It just, all my leave was gone, which means I really struggled to get time off when I eventually did come back, because I had used it all up just being in hospital for the 1 month. And the perception was, and this came directly from my manager, the perception was you went into hospital and now that you're back, the assumption is you're fine. So and I just didn't quite get that, because if you go for an operation and you get time off, it doesn't necessarily mean you can do exactly the same thing immediately upon return. So for me, that was very confusing, and I wasn't sure how to approach HR or even my line manager, because it was such a sensitive topic, and I felt that maybe it was me that hadn't recovered, and maybe it was my fault that I wasn't up to speed. With all that in mind, though, I was quite good friends with the HR lady that was there, and she helped me quite a bit to understand that, look, actually, you need to form reasonable accommodation with your manager. The problem with that was that while HR was giving me all good and solid advice, the manager level, people at the higher sort of one above me was saying no, and they weren't using their discretion for anything that I had asked for. So if I needed time off, now it was about whether or not I would go into minus on my leave days, whether I had to now pay the bank back rather for the days I take off. It was really bizarre in the aspects of, you guys are seriously not going to help me. So it was a very daunting task, because I had to print out, papers about what conditions I had and what it meant for me as a person, and how that would, how that could impact on my productivity. But then also coming to the party and saying, this is what I think you guys should do to help me. And it wasn't ever really mutual. They didn't really agree, because they had policies in place and they couldn't, stray away from those policies. It was very set in stone. So, I mean, long story short, I then started talking about my lived experience, and through that, I joined the peer network, and what we offer now is services to workplaces that want to make these changes. And I use my lived experience as an example of what should have been done. There should have been some kind of reasonable accommodation document between myself and my manager. What are the expectations? What are the reasonable deadlines? What can I meet? What can't I meet? And then reassess that in, say, 6 months. And there needed to be flexi hours and flexi office space, which wasn't allowed. They were very strict on at the time. I had to come into the office. So if I looked really bad because I didn't sleep that night, people noticed it and they ask you. And just that alone makes you feel like, oh, somebody's noticed me, but for the wrong reason. So there was a lot that companies can actually do. And I think it's worth their while to reach out to organizations that provide wellness advice and provide. So the peer network would give a package and, ask the company and the managers, what is it that you're noticing? What are the patterns that you're noticing in your employees and their production and the absenteeism? And we kind of look at it from that perspective. But another thing that's really important is to have continuous training for managers, employees, executives on what is the best way forward, and even perhaps having a mental health champion or a team of champions that run with mental health and diversity. So that's sort of my 2 cents.
Well, sorry, hearing that from Claudia, but I totally agree with Claudia in terms of there's this gap about placing the policy and implementing the policy as well. And me, my work right now is in the university. We already have the mental health law in the Philippines for like 3 years, and now we're also working in advancing of making this less like as a language in our community. We already have this center, a new center in our university in terms of helping our employees to be more open about their own mental health and having in place some of these policies. Like, for example, you have your own mental health condition. How can the HR help you in terms of being more considerate about the absences or the need for you to take a leave from work? But again, this I think this takes a long time, or it takes a journey for all of us, because like in our own community, in our own section, we also have our colleagues who are experiencing their own mental health conditions. And even if we already have a center where someone can help them, there's still that struggle of like what the first panelist shared a while ago about, will they share it? Will it affect their own status in the university? Will they lose their job if someone knows about their condition? So I think 3 things that I'm noticing that is very important would be the use of language in the company or in the community. It has to be consistent among all the employees, and also, of course, from the top management. I think it's very important that the top management, the ones who makes the policies and the ones who implements these laws, has to be very open and serves as advocates about this mental health. Otherwise, it will be difficult for us, the employees, to um, like share our own life experiences, or especially now during the pandemic, anyone can be hit about our mental health, and I think it's everyone's right and it's everyone's privilege in terms of taking our own self-care, our own mental health. And then, yeah, the policy and the gap of implementing the policy. Because sometimes, even if we have that policy, I think the challenge would be who will implement it. Sometimes there's that, what we have mentioned about in the first topic about the blame game. If there's some kind of gaps, or if there's some kind of loopholes with the policy, sometimes you need to try to look who is now at fault. So I guess that's one of the challenges that we are also facing. So there.
No, absolutely, Dynes. It's knowing how we can close off the loopholes, so companies, when they have a policy, it's not just wafer thin and it ticks a box, that it actually does a job. And I think that seems to be the problem in a lot of companies. They just have a mental health policy to tick a box. So when the next audit comes around, they can see that they have a policy, oh, okay, tick in the yes column. But when you delve deeper, and from conversations with other people in the UK who do mental health awareness training, when they've gone into a company and they've delved deeper into that policy, they've noticed it's very wafer thin. There's not much context to the policy. And I think that's where there needs to be change, that you don't just have the policy for the sake of ticking a box and passing an audit. You have a policy for the sake of people's mental well-being. Karen, your thoughts?
Well, I loved the idea. I think it was Claudia who said something about having mental health champions in an organization. And honestly, I think there should be departments of mental health champions in an organization. And also what Rachida had shared about, we need something beyond just the workshops. So I think part of the challenges for organizations is they have not had the precision and understanding how to measure wellness and well-being and mental health challenges. There's the stigma, of course. So part of the solution, which I think everybody here is on board with, is there needs to be more brave and safe space for these dialogues to happen. Senior leaders need to be vulnerable and to be able to share. There does need to be education. There needs to be more than like a one size fits all. Everybody come to a 30-minute training and then that's it. That's just clearly not sufficient, and it's incomplete. And to be honest, I scratch my head sometimes when organizations or HR leaders or functional leaders push back on, well, what's the ROI on helping people with their mental health? It's like, what? I don't even understand how that question is even a question. That obviously we're going to perform better if we're healthier, and if we have symptoms managed, we're going to show up better, we'll perform better, we'll be more productive, you'll increase revenue. So the fact that that's even like still part of the dialogue is actually kind of perplexing to me. And I think there's also the challenge of, at least in our Western culture, people or organizations and managers want really quick results. So is there like a quick solve that we can find to help this person with their depression? Or when you come out of the hospital from burnout, the expectation is you just ramp right back up. So there's so much room for increased awareness, education from the organic, like the roots of the organization. But really, I think it has to come from senior leaders. It has to come from the top, or it will not trickle down.
Yeah. Kristel, I note, Kristel's gone. That answers that then. Shawnna?
Yes, just to piggyback on Karen's response, I hasten to say that she mentioned from the top, it has to trickle down. And I completely, like, wholeheartedly agree, because if management, whether it's in the school, and I'm speaking from someone that's working in international, education, and seeing how much, and I think she mentioned Western, and culture plays a significant role. Because if we can't acknowledge, it doesn't matter how many policies, regulations, workshops, e-learning, everything that is put in place will never be identified or seen as effective, because it is not even acknowledged that mental health, it should be a core of the values and the principles that run, whether a school, hospital, whatever organization. And that's always my probably bone of contention is, do we acknowledge this, or are we just getting, as you mentioned, Steve, checking off the boxes? So if we can't even look at it and say, okay, this needs to be focused on, or someone comes into our organization and says this needs to be done, we get it done and we keep moving. But until we have acknowledged that this is a crisis, this is a health crisis, then everything that we do, we just keep repeating year after year, and we're still fighting. Why aren't we seeing the effect, the changes? And that's because within ourselves, that internal accountability is not seeing mental health as being important or significant in our working at our optimum. And so the core thing is acknowledging. When I acknowledge, it's just like any other challenges we may have. Before I get help or seek support, I need to acknowledge that there needs to be something. I need to acknowledge that. And so when it comes to mental health in the workplace, as Karen mentioned, starting from the top, the management, and not in every area, but generally speaking, they have to acknowledge that, okay, we need to not just look at this as a broad brush, but acknowledge that this is affecting our organization. How can we go for it? Everyone, you get that buy-in. And so everyone comes on board. It's teething, but we have to acknowledge first before we jump into all these different things so that the changes are being seen.
So I can only agree on what Karen and Shawnna said. I just wanted to say something. I have more than 10 years in the corporate world, and I made my way to the top. So I know, at least in Algeria, and for the people that I speak with, and from my experience, unless there is tangible something, unless there is something, because companies, whether we want or not, they speak the language of money. And speaking of what Karen says about what is the revoir on this kind of investment, I think that is where the focus should be, because unless we provide for companies, when you work on the mental health of employees, that is what you're going to get, this and that statistics. And we both know that data speaks louder, because companies and especially business owners will not be convinced, they will not take action towards something without getting back something. I'm sorry to say this, but I'm still in the corporate world, and some people just like to sugarcoat realities in front of the media, but the reality is something else. So we just need to put the sugarcoating aside, and we just need to be realistic. We need to get the numbers done. What is lost in productivity right now due to depression, anxiety, and you name it? And what can be done? What can we get if we provide training, providing mental health champions? And as well, change needs to be coming from the leaders, because if you get at least one leader or one of the senior management open up and say something, one thing about their mental health, everybody will follow, because then they feel safe. Okay, if my leader, he's in the top, he's not going to be fired, and he has actually mental health struggles, so I'm safe as well, I can speak up. So that's what I wanted to add.
No, absolutely, and I agree with all the panelists, but I noticed Claudia's message in regards to language. Language is so important in how we address mental health. So, Claudia, is there anything you would like to add on that point?
Yeah, so recently we hosted 2 workshops or engagement sessions rather with a really large pharmaceutical company, and their main what they really wanted to try and do was to brainstorm with us at the Global Mental Health Peer Network, based on experiences from people with lived experience, what is the best way to engage people with lived experience. And for me, that was really important, because they're planning what they want to do. They want to implement A, B, and C, but they're not going to yet, because they're not sure how to actually help people with lived experience. So that's where we came to the party, and we kind of helped. And this is where we brought in what everybody's basically said here today, that culture is important, language is important. Also understanding what mental health conditions your employees have so that you can provide the reasonable accommodations. And just on very simple things, like there is in South Africa, there's no word for depression in one of our official languages. So when they're trying to implement this new policy in the South African branch, they didn't realize that there's no such word. That word doesn't exist. So we have to now change that and adapt to the cultures and the different contexts that this happens. So not every company is going to be able to do it in the same way. So I think asking the question, how do we engage people with lived experience? How do we talk to them? Because you don't want to come across as discriminatory, because now everybody's talking about stigma and mental health, because now it's a topic. 10 years ago, it might not have been such a big topic, but it's a topic now. So now's the time for corporations, wellness practitioners, whomever it is that is offering these packages, to really put in the time and effort about what it means to engage somebody with lived experience and the value that that can bring those companies. Because then they hear, and so often you would hire somebody to, say you hire a psychiatrist to come and talk about mental health in general. That's not really necessary if you have people with lived experience who can share their stories and explain the same thing, and probably even give more information about how best to handle it. So I think companies are starting to see that. They're just shying away because there's a lot of challenges still. But yeah, so I thought I'd just add that in because it was really nice to see that some companies are looking at lived experience considerations.
And that's a very interesting point, because would it be worth having in companies a expert by experience, or in short, EBE, in companies whereby that expert who's obviously got lived experience can liaise with HR departments and management to try and bridge that gap? Because at the minute, particularly in the legal profession, the gap is like a chasm. So you've got management and you've got employees. Now, there should be someone in the middle, but it's very rare that there is. Yes, there is HR. Some HR departments understand mental health, some clearly don't. Would an expert by experience bridge that gap between the employees and higher senior management?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess that would be something that needs to start so that we can actually start evaluating and see what comes from it. But at the time that I was at the bank, when I was still working at the bank, I actually had offered, I said to them, you can move me to a in-between position between sort of the legal and the HR, put me in the middle as somebody with experience of mental health conditions, and let me kind of, even if it's a consultancy role at that stage, it was just to kind of get that out there, because I could see how the environment was just getting rapidly toxic and there was nothing anyone could do. And I realized through my own experience that there was just, unless I spoke, no one was really listening to what was going on. So I definitely think that somebody with EBE should be employed, paid for that as a job, because your experience is not something you learn via a textbook, right? You don't study that. It's something you go through and you learn from it. And it's through that you are able to give advice, recommendations, and that extends all the way to government policies as well, if you wanted to look at it like that. But definitely agree that there should be that kind of position.
Yeah, I mean, I know obviously just reading Dorota's message about early intervention team at a workplace, mental health first aiders on sites, mentally supportive workspaces and recreation areas, purely for rest, relax, recharge. That is exactly what is needed in the majority of workplaces. I guess the main issue would be is how is that funded, and how can we implement something like that, which is needed within the workplace?
I was just going to comment on the same thing, at how there is such opportunity right now for organizations to focus on preventative mental health. Like, let's not wait till people are in the hospital for burnout or wait until their suicide rates increase in our company. But to begin expanding and offering opportunity for people to learn where they are on that wellness continuum. Am I in the red zone where I'm having clinical symptoms of mental illness or pathology or depression or anxiety? Are people in the middle? And I'm sure many folks probably read the recent Adam Grant article on languishing, that so many people are finding themselves in that middle space that, okay, I'm not necessarily experiencing mental illness such that I can't function, yet I'm not having optimal mental health. So where does that leave me? And providing opportunities for employees or to get the right size level of intervention and the right size level of support that people need, whether they're in acute stress or they're languishing or struggling or overwhelmed. And again, moving beyond that right-sized or moving beyond that one size level of intervention, and how powerful that can be to help buffer against stress and adversity. And there's clearly not enough conversation about that. So thank you for the comment in the chat.
Yeah, I definitely think that is something that is needed. Also, obviously, language is so powerful and key. And I'd just like to get people's views from the panelists on peer support for employees. Do you feel that that would be a good thing?
Sorry, I think I'm maybe over contributing here, but I can't help myself. The question of peer support, 100%. I have found in the last couple of years, I've moved a lot to group coaching models, and that has been incredibly powerful because, number one, people need to know that they're not the only one, and they're not. And that is so isolating and damaging for people to feel that isolation and that loneliness. So I think it's incredible for empowerment, community, connection, support, and again, just even that message that I'm not the only one who's struggling and who's suffering, because no one is ever the only one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Marie?
Yes, Marie, I really wanted to talk about this because, see, I have 3 books from Canada, from our peer Steve Seed Gravel, right? And it is about his own lived experience and how it led to his creating the first peer support group among the police force. And, you know, it made me realize these police people we see and think they are superhumans, they too go through stuff. And sometimes we judge them and we think they're overreacting or they're lousy or anything. We don't know their own story and all of that. And if they don't share, how can we ever know? I read these 3 books in 5 days. I couldn't put them down, and I cannot wait to be able to do something like this in my country. It is so important. Even me, just talking about my own experience, the more I talk about it, the less I feel the weight and the pain and the acknowledgement. It helps you with your mental well-being. Imagine in a company, because I know where I was working, my boss had issues. He just did not tell anybody. But you know, when somebody starts smoking too much, drinking coffee all the time, you know, sometimes you meet him, he's dozing and stuff, you're wondering, but well, nobody can say anything. But if amongst ourselves, we can meet even once a week and just say, how is your heart? How are you feeling? And stuff like that. What's going on? There's always something going on in somebody's brain. And then you listen to other people and realize, oh, I'm not alone. So I'm not really crazy. And as I think it's Karen from the US, she said, we don't need to wait for somebody to get to the hospital and, you know, be on the street or start talking to themselves. Every day, once a week, you know, in companies, sometimes they have meet and greet on Friday evenings, or they have, you know, something, maybe exercise on Saturday morning, but it's usually just so formalized. But why can't we just sit down like round the fireside or the kitchen table or anywhere? They're doing a lot in some companies now to encourage productivity. See, it's all about productivity, but the people who have to produce, are you bothered about their well-being, their wellness? Claudia wrote an article about that. I really love that article. And I mean, it can only be championed by peers, people who have walked the talk. That's actually one of the titles, Walk the Talk. So yes, I wanted to share that and to say, if I wasn't in the peer network, I would not have met you. I would not have met Sid. I would not have met Claudia. So peer support is very important. Thank you.
I just love your enthusiasm, Marie. It is absolutely phenomenal.
Yes, I completely agree as it relates to peer support. For me, having experienced burnout and in another country, my social support was little to nothing. So because of that, you're in an environment where you're not just looking at language, you know, the difference in language, and also the different cultures that you're coming across. Not having that peer support was really, it was, you know, for me, detrimental. And so I walked through that entire process for several years, not having, or the environment was so much that you don't know who to trust. So you're not sure who do you really share this with, because of the type of environment you're in. And so I mentioned in the chat that in order to have the peer support, one of the core ways, you know, a healthy work environment is a level of trust, so that you can't speak to everyone, but you can find someone in that workplace to sit with them or speak with them, and vice versa. So for me, not having that peer support, it really caused so much on my mental well-being. And so I would definitely concur to say that having the peer support is essential, but more so once the trust is built in that organization, then persons can open up and realize, hey, I'm not the only one, you know, others are experiencing this. What did they use? What strategies did they use to get through? But not having the peer support because lack of trust contributed, you know, to my burnt out, which became detrimental. And so I definitely can see where that's essential. Whenever I'm looking for other jobs or going into other organization, I always look at, you know, those values and principles, and I listen to what is not being said to help me to gauge whether or not this is a place for me where I'll, you know, be able to work at my optimum and not feel like I'm going to be experiencing that high level of burnout that I experienced in my previous job. So yeah, having a peer support is essential, but creating trust is what will help to build that network.
Yep, absolutely. The one topic I would like to finish on in terms of discussing is, what can workplaces do to accommodate people with mental health conditions, mental health difficulties? How can they adapt to the workplace in order to make someone who does suffer with a mental health condition feel more settled and accepting within that work environment?
I'm sorry. I jumped in because, like I said, you know, what I experienced, I would not want that to happen to anyone. It can be avoided, especially burnout and, you know, anxiety and depression, which I've experienced. Psychological safety. When you're in a workplace, to say, okay, Steve, I think the idea you mentioned, I'm not sure I agree with it. So, but here are some ideas I have. You've mentioned yours. And Steve would not, I'm using your name, Steve. Steve would not jump and say, well, this is what we're going to do. And so automatically, the moment there's a pushback, we are no longer safe to show, you know, what are the challenges or concerns. So once we create an environment that is psychologically safe, then it opens up the opportunity for people to say, you know what, I'm not managing in this class. I need that support. Once you do that, you don't feel as if you're incompetent, you're incapable. All these different things will be removed because the environment is psychologically safe for you to thrive and for you to share your concerns. So yeah, that's my bit.
Yes, you like my enthusiasm. Let me show you something. This is called Mentally Healthy Workplace Pledge. You know, I'm a lawyer, so I love evidence. I signed this in 2017. It was a pledge that was passed around at the World Federation for Mental Health. And it says, on behalf of Maria Abanga Coaching and Therapy, that is me, I pledge our support for the mental health of all of our workforce. I will commit our team to doing our best at being proactive in promoting, and then you list some things and then you sign. And they were encouraging companies to do the same and to have posters put around, sometimes they say cluster points, wash your hands, la, 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 la. What about posters about mental health? What about, for example, I'm currently struggling with my sleep hygiene, and I do updates on Facebook because I know I'm not the only person who struggles with that, right? And so people reach out to me and say, yeah, I have this problem with sleep. Sometimes I have to drink. Sometimes I have to do this. I'm like, no, you sleep earlier or you drink chamomile. Or if we have this kind of conversations at the workplace, can you imagine how we even leave the workplace feeling much better sometimes than how we even got there in the morning? Because sometimes people leave from home with headache already, the stress. Maybe you are married and there's wahala at home. You get to the office, there's pressure, there's deadline, there are emails left and right and everything. We need to have these conversations. And because this one is to be signed by top management, just imagine they take this kind of commitments to a whole federation like this. They're going to be ashamed to not keep the commitments. So I don't know how many companies took that commitment, but as far as I'm concerned, in my small organization with my team of 4 volunteers, we have Monday meetups, check-ins. How is your heart? How are you feeling? We talk about any other thing apart from the work at hand, so that we feel like, yeah, that trust that my colleague from, I cannot keep the names in my head, but darling, okay, the trust, so that we feel like we are one. We cannot separate work from human beings anymore.
And there's a lot of very good suggestions, keeping in touch with colleagues, flexible and remote working as a common practice, which, to be fair, the flexible and remote working has probably become more apparent since COVID, with a lot of people working from home, and people are starting to feel that work-life balance and are starting to enjoy having that balance, which is a bonus. Also, something else that the Rota has said is, when your employee is off sick, do you have a principle of keeping in touch with employees? Do you use it in the same way with those off due to a mental health? So do you send get well cards, so on and so forth? Or is there a distinct difference to how people are treated if they're off with a physical ailment compared to a mental health ailment? I suspect the answer to that question is yes, there is a difference. However, how do we get to that point whereby we don't have that difference and that we treat everybody the same? Because there is no health without mental health, and people should at least be afforded the opportunity to be treated the same as everybody else, whether they have a mental health condition or not. They should all be treated the same. So does anyone have any concluding remarks in terms of how we can improve mental health within the workplace?
So thank you to everyone with their valuable contributions. I just have 2 points to share with everyone in regards of the finding kind of like the hybrid work system. What we do not know, or what we do not pay attention, is that I have met many people who are struggling because they work from home. They feel isolated. So it is up to each organization to find a hybrid system where they allow, there is no like one size fit formula. The statistics are actually kind of like very close. If you find people and you ask them if you want to work from home or you want to work from, you know, the office, the statistics I found, like when I was reading an article, they are very close. It was I think 57% comparing to the rest. So there is no fit size formula for everyone. You have to really kind of like dig deeper and do the work in order to find what is best for your employees, because some people thrive in working from office environment and some people thrive in working from home. So a hybrid kind of like system. And I once kind of like shared a poll on LinkedIn about this, and also the statistics were very surprising because there are some people who still want to work from office, and there is fine. There is no right or wrong when it comes to what makes someone thrive. Creating, of course, a psychological safe space. But also what I wanted to say is that we talked a lot about employers, but here I want to say about our roles as, you know, employees. Your health, protecting your mental health is actually your first priority and responsibility. So I'm not blaming here everyone, but I just say if I did not take, let's say, the steps to ask for help, to seek for help, to do the work, because we have certain expectations when going to therapy that it's going to work like magic. But what I can say to people, for employees, especially like myself, that most of the work is actually up to you. The work that you're going to start to do, it starts the minute that you walk out of the door from that psychologist or therapist. So it's really up to you to find also your work-life balance, prioritize your self-care, work on your self-love if you need. There is no shame to learn some kind of like how to regulate yourself and emotions. Be active, actually express your needs, do some journaling, whatever works for you. It's also your responsibility to show up to your workplace and honor that workplace, that responsibility, by taking care of yourself, just like you take care of your family members, just like you take care of your physical health. Your mental health as well matters, and it's not just blame also the employers, because our governments also have, let's say, a fair amount of work that needs to be done when it comes to legislations and to encouraging kind of like companies to invest in the mental health by, for example, you know, reducing the taxes for the companies who are kind of like willing to invest a certain amount of money in the mental health area. So there is a lot of work. There is a lot of work that can be done. There are some suggestions. We just hope for a better future for the next generations.
Absolutely, Rachida. Very well put. I couldn't have put that better myself. Claudia?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to end off with something. This week, I came across something really interesting, and it was in the form of, I can't really say what it is as yet, but the feedback we got was that there's this generalized assumption that you can only advocate for mental health or even do awareness campaigns or even just mental health awareness in general only if you're a mental health professional. And I think this is what stops a lot of companies as well, because maybe they're thinking that perhaps they don't have the expertise, you know, to do that, and they would need to get mental health professionals. But this is where I think conversations like what we've had today is important, because peer supports, specialists could get involved, your mental health champions could get involved, as well as your experts by experience. And, you know, by encouraging people to remember that you don't actually have to be a mental health professional to advocate for your own mental health or mental health in general, if that's your passion. And I think that hinders a lot of progress in society today. So I thought I would just add that in, and hopefully has some benefit to somebody.
And Marie?
Marie is here. I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to say, when you know better, you do better. Be it mental health, physical health, health is health. And then you cannot even be sick with a headache or with malaria or something, and then you don't feel moody. So the two go together. So what I think is, as someone said in the comments, we've made this distinction for so long, and it's like they are mad. No, I just have blood pressure, or I just have a broken leg. No, let's commit. One thing the World Mental Health Federation said was, while we wait for the top management to make these commitments, let's from the grassroots also make the commitments, and that could put some pressure on them, just like you had the work organizations. How do you call them? There was something at some point, work union, labor unions, right? Yeah. So I really think that the two can meet together. So when we know better, we do better. Thank you so much, Steve. I'm looking forward to the next ones. Thank you, everybody.
I mean, how do you follow that? And how do you conclude after the enthusiasm there? It's
try Heather as your African regional lead. You cannot stop her from doing anything. Powerful.
So I guess in terms of summing up everything that we've heard and that we've talked about, would be that peer support is key, and having early intervention teams in the workplace, mental health first aiders on site, mentally supportive workspaces within a workplace. They are all key in reducing the stigma around mental health within the workplace, and in turn, it would bridge the gap between the employees and management. If you have these experts by experience, you have peer support. Also, I think an emphasis on mental well-being training, and that they do yearly update training in order to gain more of an understanding as to how to approach mental health, not only from a practical point of view, but from a language point of view, because communication is so key in how employers communicate to their employees. Another point that I think is important to mention is mental health policies, and not having policies that are wafer thin, that are there just to tick a box to pass an audit. These policies need to be in place to work for their employees. If they suffer with a mental health crisis, they suffer with burnout, they need to be flexible, they need to be able to work. And I think if we had these robust policies in place, then companies would be getting towards understanding what mental health is all about. Obviously, COVID has accelerated the conversation on mental health, and it's obviously promoted a hybrid work-life balance with people working from home and also working in the office. And I think employers need to listen to their employees, particularly now more than ever, when a lot of companies are going back into the offices. Some employees might not be comfortable enough going back in straight away and working 5 full days in an office. They need to listen to their employees more than ever, so they get the balance right. Otherwise, you could probably see a sharp increase in people suffering with mental health conditions, be it burnout, be it anxiety, be it depression. And this is the responsibility of the employer. They need to take more responsibility than what they have been doing. And it's time that they stepped up with how they addressed mental health, how they approach the topic of mental health by the language that they use. And I think these are the things that hopefully, if employers have come onto this webinar, hopefully they will take away some key points as to how they can improve how mental well-being is seen within their company. And these little steps will lead to big changes in the long run, as Rachida said, to protect the future generation, because we don't want the future generation to go through the same struggles that we've had to go through. We want it to be better for the future. So that's the end of today's webinar. There is another webinar next Wednesday, which is mental health and youth, again the same time, 3 p.m. BST, and then the final one is on the 21st of July, again the same time, 3 p.m. BST, and that's on mental health and how it's perceived in the media. Feel free to get in touch with myself or the other panelists if you would like a link to attend those sessions. But thank you for attending today. It's been a pleasure.